call this meeting of the Assembly Budget and Finance Committee of the Whole to order. We'll start with a roll call. Susie, why don't we start with you?
Okay, Susie Marshall, Acting Director of IT.
Lance Wilbur, Office of Management and Budget.
Alex Slipka, Chief Fiscal Officer.
Forrest Dunbar.
Retraining someone.
Austin Davidson. Amy Dabowski. Suzanne LaFrance.
Peter Sebastian. Pete Peterson.
Thank you. So I'm going to change the order of the day unless there's a lot of opposition, and we're going to take up Alex's confirmation at the end, which was my initial plan, and I think there was just a miscommunication that got flipped around. But I'd like us to work through the other things first, unless Mr. Slipka, you have a hard. Can you stay for the full meeting?
I am at your disposal.
You're also on the agenda. This is an hour-and-a-half meeting, so that we could have time to both listen to the budget presentation and accommodate the confirmation hearing for Mr. Slipka. Note for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Constant, and for members of the public, we actually do have some pizza back there. So if and we're also joined by Mr. Croft. There is some pizza back there. Please help yourself. Okay, so with that, then we're going to. For the time, we're going to start with item 3A, and that is you, Mr. Slipka, speaking to us about the MOA financial status, if you would.
Thank you. So I will start with saying I'm part-time. I've been here for a couple of weeks, so I have modest knowledge, which I'm going to lean heavily on Lance and other staff to support. I would say to the extent that we know, and obviously it's not a secret, that we are dealing with systems that could work better than they do, but which we are getting much, much closer to full functionality. The municipality, as clear as I can see it, we are getting all of our revenue, we are paying all of our bills, and we have financial reserves that are allowing us to retain our AAA rating. And we have, in the part-time that I've been here, I've been able to work fairly extensively with the staff. Very impressed with the knowledge, the professionalism, and the dedication. So I will acknowledge that we've seen some struggles with the financial reporting relative to the systems we have, but I think there is a path forward, and we are on that path. I will stop there and see what questions you have. Right.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Nelson.
Okay, the multi-million-dollar question we're all waiting for. Where are we at? Do we have a deficit? Do we have a surplus? Where are we at?
So where we sit right now, and the information was obviously conveyed at the audit meeting last week, we have discovered through diligence that there was some human error done in terms of how cost allocations were done, and I think the number we're sitting at right now, what was projected to be a modest surplus, is now projected to be roughly a $6 million deficit. I would say, to caveat that, the work is not all done, that there is plenty of additional work to be done with some of the bigger pieces of the pie, including the $4 billion in fiscal assets that the municipality has. So that's where we sit right now. We should have closer answers in another week or two. That's what we know.
Follow up?
Yeah, and then Mr. Training's in the queue.
So I should probably warn you, you should pick your words very carefully when you're talking to me, because I tend to seize on them. And now you piqued my curiosity. So we're talking about IGCs that are being calculated differently or calculated wrong, or something happened there, right?
Correct.
But now you're talking about $4 billion in assets that the municipality has. Are you planning on leveraging those? Why
No.
is that coming into the conversation now?
So, and again, speaking from very limited experience, we have not yet completed all our work. Obviously, we're delayed in getting our information to our auditor so that we can complete the books for 2017 and issue our CAFR. One of the things I believe is still yet to be done is the correct examination of those assets. So I'm not talking about doing any kind of leverage. I'm just saying that there is additional work to be done until we can get to a final answer, and we hope to have that within the next 2 weeks.
Okay, and just to clarify, the potential $6 million deficit is actually for 2017.
Correct.
And give us a recap of what variables have contributed to that deficit, if you could, for the members maybe who weren't at the audit committee meeting.
I probably don't have the full detail, but it functionally all circles around, as you said, the intergovernmental transfers which were entered into the system in error. The error was discovered and they were backed out.
Mr. Trainee, and then I would like to hear some more detail on this from you, Lance, because we're sort of throwing Alex into the deep end of the pool here, and I'd like to hear if you could add any more detail to this.
Sure.
Could you, Mr. Trainee, go ahead?
Because Lance was telling us we had a positive of 1.75. Now you're telling us we had a negative of 6. That's almost $7 million error going on. And it was all because of human error, not computer error?
That is, as I understand it, there were intergovernmental charges that the municipality charges out to all of its units, and those charges were not being correctly, they were being captured in a revenue space when they shouldn't have been. And
Is the CAFR done yet?
it is not done yet.
Okay, again, I'm going to ask you, when will it be done? Are we looking at December? Because I'm about in the mood not to approve any budget for next year unless I've got the CAFR in front of me.
And I can appreciate that, and based on what I understand now, that we should have the work hopefully done so that we can deliver, and again, this is estimation, deliver the material to the auditors, I believe, sometime in October, and so it would be done probably in early November.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. So I ask you, Lance, to follow up, and then look, Ona wants in the queue as well. So go there, and then anyone else, and Mr. Bosky. So Lance, Ona, Mr. Bosky. Mr. Browse.
I didn't have anything to add. You had a question. What's the question?
I want you to provide. Can you provide any more detail to this?
I think Mr. Slifka's right on. What happened is that the error in when we generated the calculation of the $2 million, the accounting process inadvertently put money that we were charging to capital projects. It showed it up as a revenue, and it shouldn't have been. And so we rectified that. And when we rectified that, and we worked with the controller at OMB to confirm that the amount and the movement that was done to move us into that negative situation was done correctly. So we understand it, and while it's a difficult situation that we're in, that's where we are. As Mr. Slifka said, we're not done, because when we look at our 2017, there are some positive things that we see. Our revenues were positive, and our expenditures were under. It's all about that fund balance calculation, because we also need to make sure that we're preserving our 10 and our 2%, and that is part of the calculations that we'll learn more about from his team. And so until it's done, that's where we are right now.
So I want to ask a follow-up then, and perhaps this is what you want to get to, Ona. Let's say that we, I'm sorry, Ms. Browse. Let's say that we do these kind of calculations, and it turns out it's not $6 million, it's actually $4 million, and we had $1.7 million in fund balance, and so we end up with an actual deficit of $2 million, or let's say $3 million. What do we do? What are the practical solutions? Where do we get those revenues? Where do we cut potentially? Can either of you speak to that?
So let me start. So,
and then one other thing, I'm sorry, before you get going. Is this, because this is my third budget cycle now. This is the first time this has happened that I'm aware of. Is this connected to SAP, or is this purely human error that could have happened under the old system as well?
I can't answer the second part, but I do believe that the situation that we're in it's not an entirely an SAP problem. It's not a technology problem. It's partially error. So that's okay. The solution is, no matter what the number is, when we build a 19 budget, we need to make some assumptions that in a conservative perspective, that's what we would do. If the number is $4 million, we're going to assume that is the number that we have to use until we true it up. And if it's not trued up by the time we submit the budget, we will present a budget that creates 19 so that we can fill that gap. And it could be in a variety of other revenues or service reductions. And so we're working on that right now when we're building 19.
Well, that would resolve it going forward, but there still was this sort of emptiness behind, and how do you backfill that?
So that's part of what I wanted to address. The simplest way, from my perspective anyway, as a person who has gone through many of these conversations of explain it to me so I can understand it very, very easily. The deficit that was discovered is not on the operating side. So the revenues and the budget came in just fine for 17. As far as we know right now, all of the departments when they're aggregated came in at their budgets or under their budgets, and so that part is fine. The deficit that was discovered is in the capital side of the budget and the way the assets are allocated out, which means that the fund balance calculation is really the thing that's in question here, not our operating accounts or the money we have in the bank. It's the way the fund balance is calculated. So the IGC process, which is very confusing, has made it even more confusing. It is not an SAP issue, it's a symptom of conversion. So when we've had the conversation about matching up the two systems and taking PeopleSoft and SAP and putting them together, I think in the true up, there was a human mistake made that created this. That's how we went from what we thought was a positive number to now what we believe is going to be a negative number, but we still don't know because we have the final negative number because there's still a couple other things to check. To Mr. Trainey's point, it's our intention to deliver the CAFR before the vote on the budget would take place in enough time for the Assembly to review the documents and be comfortable.
I would appreciate that.
Yes.
Ms. Dombrowski. And then
Thank
Mr.
you.
Weddleton.
I have a couple questions. First of all, it's not really that simple to say it happened on the capital side and not this, because when we're talking about fund balance is used for both operational expenses and capital expenses.
Yep.
So you can't just say this isn't really a problem in the operating budget, because I think when you look at how the fund balance is used, it can be operational or capital.
I am speaking of the way the fund balance number is calculated.
Right, and
Yeah.
so maybe that's one discussion, but I don't want Assembly members to think, oh, it's no big deal, it's
No.
just over here. I mean, this is actually quite a big deal. But with that said, I also had the question, what is the plan to deal with it, going forward? And I know it's too early to say exactly. I mean, you guys are first, you have to nail down exactly what the number is, and then you're going to have to come back to us and tell us exactly how you're going to fix it. But the other thing that shouldn't be lost on this body is 2018's budget was predicated on 2017's budget plus growth. So it's not just about $4 million, $6 million, whatever it ends up being. It's also going to carry forward in 2018. You're going to have to do some true up, if you want to call it that, in 2018. So technically, we're really talking about more than $6 million if you take into account 2018. Because if you had a fundamental flaw in calculations in 2017, you built your budget on it for 2018, that flaw is essentially doubled for the next year, right? You have that 2017, so you have to figure out what that number is, and right now it's a guessing game, we just don't know yet.
So through the chair, Assemblymember Dombrowski, whatever the number is for 17, we're going to true up 17 and close the books on 17. Okay. 18, if it won't double in 18, because if we are on an 18, then we're not using any fund balance to true it up. But if we, for some reason, are over in 18, then you are right. Then we would have to be, we would have to use more fund balance to,
Right.
which
And
could
what
exacerbate it.
What I was saying is, not that 2018 I'm expecting to be 12 million. What I'm saying is if you use the same formula, the same calculation methodology that you used in 2017, 2018 is going to be wrong. And that, I'm sure, is what you're looking at now, too.
Correct.
So when you come to 2019's budget, we may have significant shifts because you may find that 2018 is fine, but my guess is not. So you might find you have a major correction maybe in 2019. So we just don't know yet. That was my point that I was trying to say, but I don't want you to miss 2018, and this is the reason I bring it up. It's a fundamental formula question, really.
Sure.
Mr. Weddleton and Mr. Trainey.
I have a question, but I want to clarify on that, if I understand. So it could be the same error was done in 2018 if we don't.
we haven't done the close of the books for 18, so you're correct.
So if there were something that we paid for out of fund balance, what happens to that?
We have to make sure at the end of the day, if we paid for it out of fund balance and we don't make enough revenues to cover that, then we would have to figure out either on our expense side and how we true up the fund balance. Because our primary goal in the fund balance is to maintain on our 10 and our 2%. Anything above that 10 and 2% is it's the unrestricted piece that we've talked about over the years that the Assembly has used to modify services in the budget. So our primary goal is to make sure that we have the 10 and the 2. And if maintaining that 10 and the 2 means that we have to reduce services or spending on services to maintain that 10 and 2 to preserve our bond rating, that will be our priority. And so if for some reason in 2018 we don't get there, then we'll deal with it when we get there. But right now 18 is looking good.
Okay, just specifically, we have on our agenda for Tuesday, it's a loan to NSTAR, I guess, for
Right.
natural gas up the Canyon Road.
Right.
And that was paid for out of fund balance. Are we at risk?
No, because we're going to borrow it out of fund that does not affect this 10 and 2%.
Okay, so that's,
It does not matter.
all right, great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Welton. Mr. Trainee?
Now, so we brought the Budget Advisory Commission into this, so they understand the problem we had. So as they're working on their estimates to us for this next budget, they know what's happening.
They are not aware because at their last meeting I was not aware. So I will.
We've got the chairman here, so would you get with him and
I
make
got with
sure
him.
they get the information?
We chatted briefly before this meeting, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So I'd like us to move along in the agenda. The next one, B, is, I'm sorry, Ms. LaFrance. Well, I was going to make a suggestion. Perhaps we could take up item F now, because it seems like that is what the primary discussion of the audit committee was.
Sure.
Is that all right? So maybe we could take that up, and then you could also ask any questions you might have at that time.
Okay. And the question I had pertaining to the first part of the discussion was just a request if you could, and it doesn't need to be now, explain a little bit about how we get fund balance. I assumed fund balance was what was left over from the operational budget, but it sounds like it's also capital funds. So you don't need to address that now.
Okay, we'll get you, yes.
Okay, so the audit committee had met last Monday, September 10th, where the news of the delayed CAFR was provided. And as it's been said already today, we expect the final CAFR to be received in November and then we need to do its part to BDO in October. And BDO, the auditor, is standing by to do that. It'll probably take 3 to 4 weeks to review and audit all the information that the MOA provides. And one piece that came up from the audit meeting had to do with the capital impairment issue being a potential big one, and that having to do with how much of the asset of SAP, questions of in-service, total value, and so on. And one particular issue with that is the auditors will need to sign off on that piece. And so that could be a potential delay in the release of the final audit. So that's one concern. And the next part of the discussion of the meeting, besides some surprise regarding the fund balance, had to do with the impacts associated with a delayed CAFR. And 3 potential impacts were identified. One had to do with revenue sharing, and if the city's portion is at risk, is someone working with the state on that to find out those requirements, and if we need to do anything else. The second had to do with general government bonds, if there's any impact. Another area of impact had to do with utility reporting and what would be the effect. And then the fourth item, have we identified all the possible impacts, and who's working on following up and bird dogging those items. And I understand Mr. Baldwin is going to follow up on some of that and be a point of contact. There were a couple of other issues as well, which I know Mr. Rivera will speak to one, but namely a request for the draft of the CAFR that gets sent to BDO so that assembly members, can see what it's looking like, even though we understand it still needs to be verified and reviewed. And until the CAFR is final, there's, a risk of changes to those numbers. So to summarize, have we identified all the potential impacts caused by the delayed CAFR? What are we doing to manage and mitigate those impacts? Can we get a copy of the CAFR draft next month? And then a follow-up item that Mr. Rivera will address.
I can speak to the capitalization issue relative to SAP and impairment. I had a long meeting with the auditor on Monday. I think we are fairly confident that when the truth is it's already capitalized and it's just a movement out of construction in progress into another capital asset. We don't believe there's going to be any impact on the cash balance in 2017. So we're working through what the entries are going to look like, and so that we can make those changes. But we very specifically did it with the consultation that it would not impact our audit opinion.
And so you expect that the issue of impairment won't delay the final CAFR?
It shouldn't delay it. We had a long discussion about impairment. When is it impaired? How do you even calculate that? And I think that discussion is ongoing in terms of when do we figure it out and when do we make that decision. And it may not be in the near term, because it may not be till we have SAP fully functional, on time, everything being done as we expect, that we can correctly ascertain, did we get what we paid for.
Do you have any follow-up questions, Mrs. France,
Well,
or
just
anyone else?
on the impacts that we discussed in the audit meeting.
So I think I can address some of these. The impact on the status of the CAFR as it relates to receiving municipal revenue sharing. We've reached out to the state, and we will receive municipal revenue sharing. I mean, that's not in question. It's just that we won't receive it on our account until we have an audited CAFR. So once we get that, then we'll receive the funds. In the bond rating, the bond rating agencies know, for a variety of reasons, that the CAFR is delayed. They're aware of that. They didn't make any adjustments to our bond rating, as Mr. Slifka noted, so they know our situation. They're aware of the time frame of the November. Relating to the utilities and rate cases, utilities do need a final CAFR when they are submitting a proposed rate change to the RCA, so it is a piece of it. There's parts of that CAFR they need that, so that's the relationship between those two. And as it relates to the last question that you had, Ms. LaFrance, are all of the matters that need to be clarified to finish the CAFR. Some of those matters are the same matters that were being clarified for the fund balance. So I think once we get that done, the CAFR will be shortly thereafter. So I think those are the 4 questions that you
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
And so just to conclude, again, a big piece of that was that assembly members get a draft of the CAFR.
Right. Okay.
And also have assurance that we receive the final CAFR prior to the budget vote. And we actually will consider formalizing that request in the form of a resolution. And Mr. Chair, I don't know if you would like Mr. Rivera to share that now, or other.
We have Mr. Welton, Mr. Trainee in the queue, so we'll have them ask questions, and then I think I want to hear about this resolution as well, specifically the time frame for passage. Mr. Welton?
Might be possible, but if you give us a draft of the CAFR, is there some way you can highlight uncertainty? So if we read, okay, this stuff you're pretty sure of, and then we read the draft, and we think this is it. And if there's certain holes in it, or
Mr. Weddleton, I don't know. I would have to talk to the controller's office and find out what they can give you and what they can, how we would illustrate it so that you can see them. You can highlight the pieces that still need refinement. I will find out.
because there's a risk of getting a draft, because it's probably wrong somewhere.
Correct.
We won't know where, but we're going to be mentally active.
Okay. Mr. Slifka and I will work with his team to make sure that we can get you what we can.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Trainee?
Lance, is the person that made this small mistake still working for the city?
I don't know. I would assume yes.
Thank you.
Well, I do want to hear from the sponsors of this resolution. Mr. Rivera just stepped out. My question is, so it's for reading on September 25th, is it set for a public hearing, or is it just, we're going to read and pass it? You're laying it on the table, and this next meeting, we're going to vote on it?
Correct.
Okay. We have a very full budget meeting today, and I'd like to get through it all, particularly so Mr. Weddleton, who some of his constituents have been emailing us regarding Mr. Slifka's confirmation, so I really want to have that done. But I also want to give the administration a chance to respond to this before we pass it. So I might ask that we delay this until the following meeting on Tuesday, but we can talk about that when we come to it. Mr. Trainee and Mr. Weddleton.
But the reason we've got this here for us, if you look on page 2, we've got the deadline of the 10th of December. If we don't pass the budget, then we have to meet daily. This is put in where Mr. Tesh and I did this 10 years ago.
Sure.
You've got to meet constantly until this budget is done.
Sure.
So that's the reason that's in there.
That I'm not. The actual substance of the, I read it while we were talking. I read through most of this. My issue is I want to give the administration a chance to respond to this in some detail before we pass it. And it's currently Thursday, and you're laying it on the table or putting it on the addendum for Tuesday. It's a little bit tight. So
We could pass and then move to reconsider and pull that out.
October 9th. And we just found out about this today, that there is this significant issue. So Mr. Weldon and Mr. Dimbosky.
Just as far as the agenda goes, I have a AMAS policy committee meeting at Elmore
Right.
at 1:30. So if I'm going to be my usual 5 minutes late,
I got you. Ms. Dimbosky?
Thank you. I'll just say, at the last audit committee meeting, I made it very clear that I wouldn't vote for the budget unless I saw the 2017 SCAFR, if it was done. And so, I know I wasn't the only member who expressed that concern at the audit committee meeting, so this is not new for the administration. What is new is not having the CAFR from almost 2 years ago, 2017, when we're about to pass 2019's budget. I think we all recognize that's unusual. I think we all recognize a series of variables as to why that's happened. But the fact of the matter is, by law, they're required to present this to us, and they need to get it to us. And it's our responsibility to, for our fiduciary responsibility to make sure we know exactly what we're doing when we appropriate a whole lot of money. And so I don't think this is shocking to the administration to see this. I mean, you both were there, or Lance wasn't there, but Mr. Slifka, you were there at the last audit committee meeting, so I'm sure you're not shocked by seeing this resolution. Basically, we just want to see the CAFR done before we pass the next budget.
And we have every intention and are working every day to get it done as quickly as possible.
And that was my understanding from your presentation, and I say your, meaning the administration's presentation at the last audit committee. The goal is to have this, the CAFR to us before we pass the budget for 2019.
Correct.
So, just from looking at this, I mean, does this shock you that we're asking for what we asked for in the last meeting?
No.
That's my point. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, well, we'll definitely have this discussion on Tuesday. I'd like the administration to be prepared to talk in detail on Tuesday about what this resolution does. And I don't like to make empty threats either. So if we are saying we resolve to not pass the operating budget of 2019, what does it look like? What does it mean if we don't pass the operating budget of 2019? And I assume it would be fairly apocalyptic. So I want you to tell us that accurately.
Just very quickly, if you look at the table of dates, 2015 was October 26th. So at this point, if these numbers are correct, then we aren't yet setting a record, and maybe we can aim to not set a record.
That would be great. So we kind of jumped around in the agenda a little bit. We went from A to F, but we were kind of halfway through B. Mr. Wilbur, do you have anything to add to B?
I would just add two things. We have a budget to actuals report for 2018. As of last week, we were 66% through the year. Our labor spend was a little under 65%, and our non-labor spend was at about 54%. So overall, the departments are still continuing to manage money well, so that is good to see. 2019, a week from tomorrow, we have scheduled 2019 budget presentation overview. It'll be a high-level overview of the 2019 budget. We're scheduled to present that to the clerk on October 2nd. Then it will be an addendum to the agenda item on October 9th. And so that's our schedule for 2019. And I am working with the Budget Advisory Commission to get them caught up, and then a scheduled potentially other meetings. So that's all I have for item 6 or 3B.
Thank you. Any questions for Lance on item 3B?
Did you say that you would have a presentation for us on October 2nd?
No.
September 28th.
Oh, okay.
On September 28th will be a large overview of the budget, all of them.
Great. Okay. Any other questions before we move on to Mr. Tamiani?
You're moving off the resolution.
Yeah, the resolution was just handed to us, but we still have the agenda to work through, and I'd like to work through it.
I guess I just had a quick question on the resolution. We're quoting the charter, which everyone knows. We're telling the administration they're late, which they know and we know. And we're saying we won't vote on a budget, shall not approve. Is that an order to us? I mean, what is the impact of us saying we shall not do something? So we're telling them and ourselves and the public, but it doesn't mean we can't. We can pick it up and do it anytime. Okay, so besides quoting what the charter says and us telling ourselves what we're going to do, it doesn't have any effect.
Yeah, it just sends a very strictly worded public message to the administration, really is what it does. Resolutions really don't have, like this, don't have, just the same as the one Mr. Cummings was talking about in the last meeting. They don't have an effective law.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Train?
For the purpose of this, the public administration, we're dead serious about this. If that means we got to have somebody, because we can do whatever we want with the resolution. Amy's right, it has no force of law. But I want this administration to understand how serious this is. We're way far into the end of this year to not have a capper.
Would you lose their number?
They lost our number.
Well, we are required by the charter to pass a budget by December 10th, or hold, as you said, we will hold daily meetings indefinitely under our promise here through Christmas and into next year. So
I got no problem.
you're it's kind of like you're anyway. Okay, Mr. Weddleton.
I think the administration has the message.
Yeah.
So I don't see this as necessary for that, but it is a critical issue. This outlines it very clearly. I think it's more important for the public. Yes, we're aware this is a situation, and just be open and honest, and this is transparency. Because these meetings are not. I mean, who's here? Staff, reporter, fortunately, and but retailers aren't reading our articles a day late. So anyway, that's where the interest of this is to me. It's just tell the world this is where we are and be open and honest.
Okay, Ms. Brous.
Through the chair, I'm sure that everyone is aware of this, but the administration absolutely agrees that this needs to get to the assembly as soon as we can possibly get it to you. This is not being done deliberately. This is a circumstance that we are currently in. So it is our goal to get it to you as soon as we can with reliable information in it, and we will.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Brous. All right, we're going to move forward now. Mr. Tamiani, you have a report from the Budget Advisory Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're going to schedule a meeting on October 4th, and probably a couple, perhaps 2 or 3 more meetings during the month of October to address the budget. We're going to be taking more of a look at the labor contracts, as we do have a pretty stable committee at this point. In the case of appointments, I think there's only 2 or 3 of us that have lapsed. And so we'll be reporting our results, to you also.
I have a question. Are you at full strength now? I know you've had some turnover. Is there still a vacancy on the BAC?
I think thanks to the fortunate of Ms.
I'm sure there's at least one.
There's at least one.
Actually, or.
Well, I know we just appointed Ms. Kelleher.
Right.
So but is there still
There's
one
still-
more?
There's one more.
So I guess I would ask of the administration, are you currently searching for someone? Do you have someone in mind? How close are we to getting that full?
I think we're currently searching for people, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, anything else, Mr. Tamani? Any questions for Mr. Tamani?
I have nothing else to report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for the Budget Advisory Commission? All right, seeing none, we're going to move forward. SAP progress report from Ms. Marshall. Oh.
While she's doing that, I will get started. So we've come to the Budget and Finance Committee meeting over the last few months showing sometimes budget requests for consultants and additional staff and the new structure that we were proposing for the SAP team, if you will. And this is the next step, which is the full budget for 2019 for SAP operations, and the comparison between 17, 18, and what we're proposing for 19 that would incorporate the new structure with, was it not working now? You have to plug it in.
I was. It just the whole machine just.
Oh, do we have a paper copy of that?
I don't think so. We can get you one though.
Or send it to us electronically,
Yes.
please.
Let me see if someone else can get to the network. I can show a.
Switch it out and have Bill go first.
I know, right? Pivot to Bill, so that's mine. Can we do that? I'll go get my PowerPoint and the presentation. Can we do that?
Sure.
Skip it. I'll be right back.
Do you want to just email it to Bill? Oh, you're not
I
working.
can't. I'll be right back.
There is a metaphor. I would say there's a metaphor at work.
You know that SAP is not the internet, Mr. Compton.
If it were, we'd all be in a much different place. It would be 1999.
Boy Scout Bill Falsey is ready to go.
Scout Bill, did he tell you he's our human sacrifice?
No.
What?
Yeah. You should have been there. Oh, you were there.
What?
That transaction doesn't qualify. He's the sacrifice.
Oh. Mr. Falsey, I guess we will start up with the scope and status of pay correction liability.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Our regular monthly updates. Last time we had the theme of radical transparency means selling the bad with the good. This time is sort of in the same vein. So this is the theme of 1 step forward, 1.1 steps back. And we'll step into that. So, what is the what is the pay correction story? Every time I've said there are 3 windows into it. The first window is that people give us a paper pay correction, say something was wrong. Since we turned on SAP, these are the paper pay corrections that have come into the office. You will note that in the last 2 months, the number has gotten bigger. I'm going to explain to you, I think, why that is as we step into the presentation. The story has typically been, we have been stabilized at this manageable but not as good as it used to be number, but it's pretty flat. We had a spike in August, and it's probably going to be a spike again in September, and I think that's going to affect the overall bottom line story. The other 2 windows into the pay correction story, what is the machine telling us? So regardless of whatever an employee has identified, when we reprogram SAP, it goes back in time and says, how should I have paid people? And it identifies errors. On the overpayment side, all of the overpayments happened when we first turned it on last year. We have been relatively stable and flat since we have been operating now. That still looks pretty good. We have recouped a bit of the overpayments, but we have not really prioritized this. So most of that money is still sitting out in employees' pockets. On the underpayment side, we have a similar story where there is some noise on the signal. We have a little bit of underpayments every pay period, but that's to be expected with folks who just forgot to put in their leave or forgot to cancel their leave, etc. That is a manageable amount of money, and all of that has been fixed. So every time the system has said somebody got underpaid, we fixed it. So all of that money is back where it belongs. We have shown the charts where it breaks it all down by union. In the interest of time, I haven't added them here because the story hasn't really been changing. But again, anybody who wants any of that stuff, I'm happy to provide it to you. The more recent topic for this forum has been, okay, so how are we doing in actually clearing those paper pay corrections? And a reminder that the paper pay corrections are not making necessarily corrections necessary from the employee's point of view. So if I sent in something that said I was underpaid, and we figured that out and reprogrammed the system and fixed everybody who got overpaid through that same error, my pay correction form may still be sitting in the stack unfinished. But there are a lot of people in the paper pay correction stack that do still need some kind of correction, so this matters. The first time we did this, we were at something like 35%. And the second time, we jumped to 65%. And I said, I'm hoping that this is going to be the new trend. We will clear out this backlog. Everything's going to be good. And then the third time we did it, we went from 63 to 65. And I had a tale of woe for why that was. So how did we do this last month? We were at 65. Here are the new numbers. We cleared out another 130 or so of the backlog. We finished looking at another 170 or so and realized that they need to be corrected by a reprogramming of the system. We cleaned out a small number of those that were in review. Those are the fire, transit, and central payroll ones. And then we got that new slug that we haven't yet started to process. We made some progress, but we got more in than we finished, which means we actually went a little bit backwards, which is the news I got on Monday, which is not very acceptable or exciting to me. So I'll have more to say about what we're going to do about that. Why did that happen? Well, there are 3 reasons why that happened, and 2 of them are familiar to you. Last time I said, how come we didn't make a whole lot of progress in getting through the paper pay corrections? And I said, the first was we reprogrammed the system so that everyone would be able to have better access to time cards. And when we turned that reprogramming on, in fact, everything broke and no one could get to time cards at all. And it took a lot of time for them to fix that problem. Well, it turns out when they were fixing that problem, when people were unable to process paper pay corrections, they were also unable to correct and fix time errors before they actually resulted in paychecks this month. So we got a new slug of paper pay corrections, in part because all the people that are supposed to prevent the errors from happening in the first place were sidelined by this. And the other thing I told you about last time, there was a 2-week period when SAP was just not working, and it would say, you have a memory error, and you have to leave the transaction and take a break. So third thing that happened, which was not happening as of last time, but did happen this month, we have a new error that we don't understand, but we are trying to fix. And that is holidays. So when we went into the Labor Day holiday, holidays were, for most people, working, but for a lot of people, not paying anything or paying twice as much as they're supposed to. And that required some emergency processing. Payroll saw that error happening in the system before the checks went out, and they put in overtime, and they were working until 10 p.m. on the day before checks went out to prevent that from happening, but it took them off processing paper pay corrections. And it did one other thing, which is, recall that we said I was hopeful that this blue chart of paper pay corrections that are stuck by a defect, or should have been fixed by a defect, but that we now need to fix. Hopefully that bar would get a lot smaller, because we are processing a lot of defect corrections. Well, we did process a lot of defect corrections, and as we started to turn them on, so we said system is reconfigured, now retro the pay, fix everybody's pay so that it should be correct. When the retros were happening, the holiday error was also happening. So if I was underpaid $50 because of some shift differential, we fixed the shift differential. We say system pay bill is shift differential. All of a sudden, all of my holidays are also screwed up, which meant we had to stop fixing the paper pay corrections on the defects, and that slowed things down too. That is issue number 1 right now. We don't understand why the holidays are not working. It seems like a time system should handle holidays. It's not like a unique thing the municipality does. Everybody pays holidays. We're on it, but it's intensely frustrating. The upshot is, last time around we said there were 54 defects that were related to pay corrections in some way. 16 were open. One of them still required some negotiations. One of them was an APDEA issue that was going to you guys on the 11th. We had 37 that were closed. Remember, those are still in the mix because there are some paper pay corrections that have already been fixed by a closed defect, but no one has yet gone back to the pay correction and said this is fixed. The new stats are we have 12 that are open. No more require negotiation, so we should be off to the running. 42 of those defects are closed or will be after release 4, which happens on October 5th, which, again, I'm hopeful should resolve a lot of the open pay corrections and leave us that our grand total now is 56. I'll say 2 things about this. One is I'm hopeful that after October that we will be able to make much more substantial and rapid progress, but there is going to be a window where things that must be resolved by processing new SAP fixes will be delayed because we are going to be doing a large SAP upgrade from October to early December that's going to prevent regular non-emergency transports, which is our technical word for putting fixes into the system. I'm hopeful that that will affect a relatively few number of people and the minority of pay corrections, but it does mean that once we do this when we do this meeting in October, hopefully we'll have progress. The November meeting will probably not look like a lot of progress over October, and then again in December it should be better again. That's my current expectation. Meanwhile, we would very much like this story to end. Getting to 100% is my objective. I don't want to do this anymore. So we have been talking to payroll. How do we get to that? Payroll has had 5 people who have been processing this. We've said that's it. Everybody is going to be doing this on whatever free time they have. So we're taking the pay corrections team from 5 to 14. And Renee, to her credit, our acting payroll director, has said we're going to find 2 hours a day for everybody to do this. So this remains a top-of-mind subject for payroll. They have been beset, like as they have been since we turned SAP on, by things they did not know were coming their way. We're going to staff it in such a way that we hopefully can make some significant progress on that. But the theme of this week is, this month again, 1 step forward, 1.1 steps back. Hopefully the next time we'll have some better progress to report.
Mr. Kahn.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So the issue of collecting overpayments is one that I continue to say at some point we're going to have to write it off, I think. Maybe not, but I question what happens with people in that pool who are no longer employed with us.
So people are no longer employed with us. We are hopefully reaching out. We were just discussing this Wednesday morning. I've asked Karen Dorsworthy and ER and payroll to identify those people who have overpayments and to send them some kind of notice that says, we know that you have an overpayment. At some point, we are going to need to recoup that money. We will give you a standby for instructions. Some people have already received emails that said, you have a small overpayment. How do you want to handle it? Do you want to pay us a check? Do you want us to take it out of your next paycheck? Do you want to go on an installment plan? I think a lot of these, maybe every assembly member received that email. Most people who are in the overpayment status have not received that email yet. The first step then is we're trying to tell people this is coming. For most people, we'll then want to work with all of them and make it very clear, very transparent. We're not doing this before we fix all the underpayments, before we fix all the rest of it. The end of your story, though, is when people separate, that's the point where we got to get the overpayments back or figure out some payment plan. Because we really don't want to be in the position of chasing people who are no longer municipal employees who still have some amount of money they have received. But I'm not aware that we are in that situation with anyone yet. I know that we have had some employee separations where the final paychecks, there was a pretty substantial bite out of the final paycheck to recoup the overpayments. I think those are a handful of situations, onesie, twosies.
So, just follow up then is that the tax season, October 15th is upon us, end of the year, the end of the year, and we have paid people, and they're now taxed, and we have a problem in that. any repayment back from them could be a penalty on them that is even beyond our reach. And so it's important. Maybe it's not the most important thing, but it's pretty important.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Trainee.
Mr. Palsy, the company that built this SAP, do they have people here to help us with this? Because we got release 4 coming out, you said on the 5th of October, and we don't know what problems that's going to cause when that release hits. I feel sorry for you because you keep trying to plug the gap. But this is the same discussion we had in the last year with SAP. Overpaying people, underpaying people. Is SAP itself as a company coming here and working with us to correct this problem? Because they've got a manifest problem going on in the system.
Yes, through the chair, SAP is involved, SAP consultants are involved. You've heard the AMS contract, the application management support, those are all SAP people. Owen can probably speak to it in greater detail about how SAP is helping staff all this. But I will say that the number of the, well, I think that's probably all I can say about that. The SAP is here. We are paying most of those people from SAP who are here, which is also unsatisfactory. But
There's only a couple of people from
Who's paying
SAP.
SAP or us?
Currently, I don't know the answer to that, but we only have 1 or 2 people who are actually SAP consultants. The other consultants who are working on the project are Peloton. And Susie this is part of the update that we have for Susie's presentation. So if Bill's done, we can plug the computer in and then go through this. It's a little tenuous, Mr. Trainee.
I know.
We
It's been that way for
have
3
gone,
years.
yeah, we've gone through a lot with SAP employees and consultants and have found more comfort and progress with Peloton employees. And
Used to be SAP employees.
they are considerably cheaper. SAP rates are usually about $300 an hour, and Peloton is about $150. So the consultants, as you'll see in the budget presentation, do you want to plug that in so we can just go into it?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm sorry to delay.
No worries. Are there any other specific questions for Bill before we continue with the SAP presentation from Ms. Marshall? Okay. Why don't you go ahead, Ms. Marshall?
Let's see if this one will blow up. So it's probably very comforting to have the IT director's computer die.
And we may speed through this a little bit just so that you have time to get to conversation with Mr. Slipka. We'd be happy to do this again next month if that's so desired. But this is just
We have
what we think is
35
positive
minutes. I know
information.
Mr.
Yeah.
Welton has an out, but, you know, with the whole.
Yeah, I would like to switch the order. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
This is not time sensitive. We can do next month without any issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's do that then. So could someone please hit the lights and we will take up. Yeah.
I will print it and then maybe hand it out, and then you guys will have it by the end. Okay. Yep.
Great. And we will now take up. We will now take up the confirmation hearing for Mr. Alex Slifka, Chief Fiscal Officer. So, Ms. Slifka, Mr. Slifka, if you could very quickly introduce yourself, and then I think we have some members' questions. Is there someone on the phone? I know someone was planning on calling in. No? Okay.
This is Kathy Gallagher.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ms. Gallagher. So we will speak with you in a moment.
Thank you.
Mr. Slifka, please.
Certainly. So you received my resume, I think. I think it details a lifetime served in both financial services as well as community service. I've been in Alaska now 21 years, and during that time, I have been able to both work for McKinley Capital, but also do an extensive amount of community volunteer work. Roughly 15 years on the Covenant House board, both as a board member and as a mentor of the youth. You'll see a theme throughout much of what I do is all circles around kids and or money. During that time, I worked together with a very successful team to build what is now a much improved shelter for homeless children in Alaska. I continue to serve on the investment committee for that organization. I have done volunteer work, obviously, with the Muni. I've been for many years on the Investment Advisory Commission, working very closely with Dan and his team. I currently chair the University of Alaska Foundation, which is a roughly $400 million endowment. I have served for, I believe, over 20 years as an arbitrator within the securities industry, where in what was the NASD and now FINRA, if you have a disagreement with your broker, you go to arbitration, and I am one of the people that hear those cases. I also have done volunteer work for the school district, mentoring young kids in their gifted mentorship program. Many of those kids actually now have grown up and served both in our state pension system as well as the permanent fund. I was excited to have the opportunity to come work for the city. I have always been impressed with the caliber of the staff that I've worked with, and I'm really looking very much forward to sharing. I think the singular skill is one of organizational stability and helping teams to work to their highest potential. I am not afraid of anything. I think what you will hear going forward is an example of a very difficult time that I handled, I think, with the highest level of professionalism, and I will stop there and be happy to entertain any questions.
Okay. We'll start with you, Mr. Weddle. And for my colleagues, it's item 11 Bravo in the packet. You happen to have your packet, and there's some in the back there, too.
I got a couple questions. One, are you a CPA or what's your?
I am not a CPA. My expertise really is purely in financial analysis.
Yeah, that sounds enough.
Correct.
So this has been a big issue, I don't know what you call it, the ball field, softball field, football field thing. And just for people, I was somewhat involved with that as chair of Halo, of like owners organization.
Just speak up, I think.
Oh, yeah, so, and got to know Alex and Kathy and others who were involved with that, and it was, by the time I got involved, there were lines drawn, angry people, there was no room for compromise, and there was a huge gap. It was very frustrating, because I think there was a win-win in there, but things ended and moved through, but my experience with Alex is he was fairly unflappable in the face of some very contentious meetings on these things. I don't know the details of the term between the homeowners association, what went on there, but I actually gained a lot of respect for the way Alex and other people involved with that handled themselves throughout that. So while I was trying, and I think we'll hear some things that are disparaging, and I don't know about their legitimacy or not, but what I saw was rather encouraging. That wasn't a question. I guess I made it.
Yeah, Ms. Sabasi?
Thank you. Okay, so I appreciate the fact that you've been so involved with the community, but when I'm looking at the CFO, that's not really what I'm interested in. I'm interested in your financial qualifications and your experience. I am very much interested in your experience at McKinley. And can you talk to us a little bit about your experiences there, specifically with some of your different fund management, some of your different experiences when it comes to financial analysis, and why you think it makes you qualified to be the CFO of the city, the largest city in the state?
Sure. So my career initially started when I was working in Seattle. I was running a broker-dealer of roughly 30 offices and 200-plus reps, both supervising their sales activities as well as their trading activities. And in that role, I also started investment advisory subsidiary, which deals with managing assets. So when I came to McKinley, my role initially was one as a portfolio manager, wherein directly responsible, again, working with the team to invest our clients' money, which includes both PERS and TERS, as well as the permanent fund, as well as other large plans and endowments. The objective is always to earn a return above market expectations, and also what goes hand in hand with that, and where I think the key piece here is asset allocation and stability of assets, and that's a lot of the work that I've done both with Dan's team as well as with the Community Foundation. The important thing in any type of endeavor where you're attempting to earn a return is stability of process and team. And so, what I have always done, advocated, and implemented is that level of stability. And so I think what I see here, 2.5 weeks on the job, is great people. There's opportunities for improvement in terms of team communication. There clearly, as we work through cleaning up all the bugs within SAP, there's plenty of opportunities to do the job better. And that really is my complete focus, is always how can we do this job efficiently and for the best interest of the community.
Okay, and specific to your, what you have listed in here as your current, well, now as former Director of Institutional Marketing, what do you do there?
A marketing role. So, for example, the responsibility is retain existing clients, state permanent fund, state of Minnesota, things like that, and to get new assets for the firm to manage. So, very much involved with the roughly 2-year process we did, which culminated in a partnership with the Permanent Fund to institute an access fund where the Permanent Fund is partnering with McKinley to invest in Middle East, Africa, and South Asia. So functionally, it's marketing and sales.
Which in politics may serve you well. I'm more interested in your fiscal management and asset management experience. And I think even though you went to Brown, I won't hold it against you.
Thank you.
So I have a question, and correct me if any of these assumptions are wrong, but you're working for McKinley Capital. It's a private firm. You're seeking a certain return, but I assume with a relatively higher rate of return, you also are going to take larger risks than maybe is typical in public finance. Is that not the case? I mean, do you see, and this might have been what sort of Amy was, or Mr. Massey was going for, is we very much value stability and security and a relatively low rate of risk. Is that something is that a philosophy you share, or do you see us sort of trying to create a higher return as they did at McKinley, or are my assumptions totally off?
So, not off. Each investment pool has a very specific objective. And so obviously your cash management pool, which obviously I'm familiar with in my role in the Investment Advisory Commission, which was crafted to great effect by my predecessor, Jeff Sins, which, as the Finance Department has presented to you, has added over $80 million in additional revenue to the municipality over its 10 years of existence, has a very specific risk profile. And so I am not interested in changing that risk profile. Certain monies have certain requirements, and those requirements bring with them an asset allocation decision-making process. As an example, what I think Dan and his team have done recently is you had money set aside for the ultimate decommissioning of the landfill. That's not going to happen for 30, 40, 50 years. It was sitting in a low-income environment. That doesn't make any sense. So Dan and his staff in that instance implemented an asset allocation that's going to generate a much higher rate of return because we'll need the money 30, possibly even much further out. So I very much agree that funds that have a specific risk profile is what drives their investments, if that's helpful.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Mr. Trainee, and then I'd like to hear from Ms. Gallagher. Yep. Go ahead, Mr. Trainee.
I think Robert Harris had IT reporting to him. I understand the new scheme of things. IT is going to report to the mayor, not to you. Is that because you have a background in IT, or why is that happening?
I think it describes a thoughtful approach to management across the entire municipality. Information technology is no longer just a tool that we use, obviously, it's been the big focus of this discussion. It deserves to have a person directly focused on that, directly reporting to the mayor and supporting the entire system across the municipality. So it makes a lot of sense.
Do you have any background working with city accounting system at all? Because I see most of your stuff's all private. Have you worked with cities or at all? You're not a CPA by trade.
Not a CPA by trade. Many of my clients not necessarily are municipalities, but large government entities, obviously. I am familiar with accounting in general and the purpose behind it. Obviously, municipal accounting brings with it a variety of flavors, and I am working to come up to speed on that. I have many friends in this industry. I actually just had dinner last night with the chief fiscal officer, financial person for the city of Seward. So, and have many friends who I can turn to with questions if I don't understand something. But you have a great team already existent in the finance department across public finance as well as treasury. My job is really to help them be even better at what they do.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. So at this time, Ms. Gallagher, if you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate this opportunity you all have given me. Well, I have some comments, and I'm open to taking any questions that you may have. As you know, I sent you mass amounts of correspondence that has taken place for a few years between Mr. Slipka and myself and things dealing with our Alternative View State Homeowners Association. So I won't take a lot of time going over that unless you have questions. I guess I have two main concerns with this. I feel that there was a mismanagement of funds within our homeowners association. Mr. Slipka spent an exorbitant amount of money under the guise of representing, he stated, anywhere from 75 to 90% of the homeowners in our neighborhood. The number changed frequently. My concern with that was there was never a vote taken. He claimed that since people voted on the budget within our homeowners association, that was good enough. But in my opinion, the support of the fields or not supporting the fields is very different from here's a budget. There was a group of us that repeatedly asked him to take an actual vote of homeowners, and he refused. I told him I would set up a survey on Monkey Survey so that we could get an accurate account of who, saw what, and that we could put both of us on there, him and myself, to get the results. He declined that offer. My biggest concern is we had a meeting where we were going to vote on field and and there were about 4 of us that had over 40 proxies, and Mr. Slipka was president at the time, and he denied us those proxies, which would have changed the results at the homeowners meeting. He told us that since they only had one signature on them, that they could not be accepted. However, in prior years, he had accepted proxies with only one signature. So I looked through the bylaws, and it states that the homeowner needs to sign the proxy. That's a singular term, being one. But he just refused that. So my concern there is I feel as though things were manipulated for his own agenda on this. So he continued to spend money without actually knowing what the numbers were. If you take a look at the audit that was done, it addresses this issue. Mr. Slipka went around and got signatures from South Anchorage people and people in our neighborhood. And that's what he originally was using his 90% number off of. We asked repeatedly for a copy of that so we could verify his number. I told him straight up, if the neighborhood does not want football field in there, I will let him go do his thing. All I wanted to know was what do the homeowners really want. If you'll look in that audit, it came out to 27% of homeowners had actually signed it, The rest were children. They were from neighboring areas. They were duplicates. They were spouses from, two spouses from a home. You only get one vote. So the numbers were very skewed. We brought this up to him and asked him then to please stop using those numbers. He refused and just went about his business spending the money on this. So that's my main concern is the manipulation of numbers for personal agenda. The second part of that is Mr. Slifka is a very personable, amicable, intelligent man. I had a difference of opinion on the field, and it was very difficult. There was a lot of harassment going on, and other things that made life difficult for me to raise my children in the neighborhood that I love and that I moved in to stay there for a very long time. So those are my two main points.
Thank you, Ms. Gallagher. So I need to say a couple things before we go forward with this. So I've been talking with the clerk, and I had previously spoken with our attorney, who unfortunately can't be with us here today. But as you know, we have pretty specific rules when it comes to disparagement of character and debate. I'm sorry, did you say something?
No, that was me.
Oh, I'm sorry. When it comes to people between assembly members. So you can ask questions of Mr. Slifka, you can ask questions of Ms. Gallagher, but the opinion of our attorneys was if we need to have debate and discussions of questions that go to Mr. Slifka's character, we need to do them in executive session, and that will have to wait until Tuesday night. If that's clear. So Mr. Weddleton and Mr. Slifka, you can also respond to Ms. Gallagher. So that's fine, and him is fine, but us debating each other run into some issues. So we'll start with Mr. Weddleton and then Ms. Nabosky.
I guess I'll have a quick question, but I don't know if I have time to wait for the answer. So, Kathy, I'll listen to the tape afterwards. One thing, I think this is all very, very important, whereas I know Alex and trust him and count him as a friend. The public face and credibility of the position is critical because we're talking about public money and can we trust this guy? So, I mean, it's worth airing these issues. They should be brought up now rather than later. I appreciate Kathy doing that. Kathy, on probably one of the most substantial points you make, we got a copy of the audit that was done. But when I read the audit, it generally says things were done properly. It doesn't. To me, if I had read that independently, I would not see any red flags at all. So I think it actually speaks well of Alex's work. I mean, you read it. How do you read that differently?
Well, I think I do agree that they did say there were extremely glaring things on there. A lot of it went to disorder of books, record keeping. Again, we had signing of checks that he was doing himself. At one point, he held the office of both president and secretary, which is against the bylaws. He held that for a while. And so, I guess my concern is when you have somebody who's going to be running a city budget, you need to have accurate record keeping. That was one thing that was brought up, and there are 2 documents on the audit, so hopefully you have both of those there. But it states that things were in a state of disarray. When I had asked Mr. Slifka for the finances, for the financial, on multiple occasions, and all he would say is they're up on the website, and all that was the budget that was approved at our meeting. That those are financials. Our bylaws state you can get them within 24 hours. I never did get them from him. But when he was voted out of office, he had to turn the books over to our new president, which I was working with. And when we got the financials, they were dumped in boxes. Nothing was organized. It took us about 4 days to sift through everything, get it organized, so that we could actually figure out what was going on. And if you're running a city budget, you can't run it that way. But also within the audit, it stated, and I apologize, I don't have that information right in front of me at the moment, but it was stated that basically there were things in place, things happening that should not have been happening and that needed to be cleaned up.
Thank you, Ms. Gallagher. Mr. Weddleton had to run to another meeting, and Mr.
Oh, no
Peterson will
problem.
also be going to the same meeting. Ms. Domboski, then Mr. Constant, and then Mr. Slifka, I think you should have a chance to, if you want to respond to some of the things Ms. Gallagher said.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll just say, if I have concerns about a candidate, I'm going to say I'm on the record. I won't wait for an executive session. But I want to get to the heart of this. And what I'm understanding is allegations of disorganization and mismanagement. Kathy, is what I'm hearing you say, of funds relating to a specific project and maybe bypassing the process. But there's no allegations of anything illegal.
Well, he did spend money without the permission of the homeowners association because he was doing it under the guises of representing that homeowners association, which he only had 27% support from what we could tell, because the vote was never done.
Right, and what I'm understanding you to say is that that was a manipulation of the process in order for him to achieve some sort of goal, but I have seen no, I can view that as something as maybe a difference of opinion of reading the rules, not something that's illegal. Was there any allegations of illegal activity?
Well, I would say that that would be fraudulent actions if he's spending money and saying that he can do this because all these people support him when he don't.
Okay.
He's running it and he wasn't allowed, he was blocking the process.
And was there any allegations of fraud that have been filed against the nominee for CFO? Or the appointment?
Carl, are you asking me?
Yeah.
Before, I'm sorry, I'm not understanding your question.
I'm asking if there was ever a specific allegation of fraud that has been brought against the appointee for CFO.
Not that I did, not that I am aware of, I don't know.
Okay, and Mr. Slifka, I'd like to go to you. As you can probably tell by my line of questioning, I can see this from two different angles. What would you like to say about this? And then I'll just follow it up by asking you to provide me with 3 professional references that I can call on Monday and talk to, because that's one thing that's not in your resume is references.
Okay, I'd be happy to do that. Really very specifically, it's a gross misrepresentation of the truth. We have bylaws that were followed. We had meetings that were properly noticed and held. All of that documentation is available to anybody who wants to look at it at the website, which is www.tveha.org. Meetings were held where there was a quorum, and any monies that were spent on behalf of the association were done under approval of budgets. All those budgets were available to everybody. Kathy attended those meetings. She got those budgets. There was, as she states, there was a difference of opinion as to whether money should be spent on contesting the installation of a football stadium at South High. Much at the direction of Kathy and a group which were concerned that in a normal meeting we might have 30 homeowners, or roughly maybe 20% of the homeowners association. So meetings are noticed, people have the opportunity to show up, they know it's on the agenda, we vote on the agenda, there's no mystery that we're hiring an attorney to oppose the development of the field. That those actions are done. The concern has been we don't represent the homeowners. So we made an extra special effort, and there was one meeting where there were actually over 80 homeowners. So we had half of the neighborhood of 160 homes show up. At that meeting, again, it was the same result. The majority of the members of that neighborhood supported the homeowners association. My role as president of the homeowners association was to act at their direction, much in the same way that as CFO, I act at the direction of the mayor and the assembly. So it is clear that Kathy had a different view as to what the homeowners association should be done. And functionally, when she describes this survey, this was her trying to say 50% is not good enough. You need to go out and survey every home. Well, that's nice. It would be like Forrest saying, I didn't win my election, so I want to revote, so everybody votes. People have the opportunity to attend a meeting and participate. The vast majority of people did participate. It was very interesting that until I saw that email this morning, I was unaware that they had done a forensic audit, and my reading of it is exactly what your reading of it is, that nothing wrong was ever done.
And if I could just follow up, just to have you on the record, have you ever been charged with theft or any or fraud in any capacity?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, I think we, in a roundabout way, got to all my questions. Really, the question I have for Ms. Gallagher was, you mentioned a lot of questions you had of the process. Were those questions asked in open session of the homeowners association when there was a quorum, when a meeting was happening, or were these just questions that were posed in an ongoing manner over time?
I would say both. Okay, I think it's important to note that this went over a time period of several years. We had meetings, we had questions asked in meetings where Mr. Slipka would shut us down. He would not answer them. He would talk circles around us, and we kept trying to get answers from him.
Can I interrupt real quick? So when that was happening, what I understand under Robert's rules or general rules of order is when a majority in a room makes a determination, doesn't matter who the president or presiding officer is, then that's where the conversation goes. Did you have a majority in the room at the time when you felt like things were getting run around in circles?
Yes, we did. It was at one of our large ones where we had the 40 proxies that Mr. Slipka would not accept. In that particular meeting, we asked direct questions and he would not answer them. At one point, we actually had a question on the floor that had been seconded, and it was never voted on. We brought it up a couple times. There's a motion on the floor. There's a motion on the floor. It needs to be voted on, and he just moved the meeting along. Being president, he got to dictate the direction that things went in, and so as we tried to get things back on track with those, things like that happened. So it's very frustrating.
So this is just a little editorial. I often tell people when they want to learn how to be engaged in politics, they go to their community councils or their homeowners associations, because really this is the grassroots, and majority rules most of the time. So
I agree with that, and my concern is we would have had the majority that day had he accepted the proxy. I asked his proxies, which he gave me the option to do, and I looked at them, and I'm looking at them, and of course they all had 2 signatures on them. Probably the best one, because I said to him, these are the same signature. He's like, no, they're not, no, they're not, no, they're not. But probably the best one was where the husband and wife had both signed it, and they had both dotted the I with a little heart over it. I brought that to his attention, and he's like, I was standing there, they both signed it. I'll just leave it at that.
So, okay, I want to read a couple of the findings and I'll let it go.
Okay, so other people in the queue.
In the findings, read, bookkeeping practices were adequately maintained by the bookkeeper during the range of dates reviewed. Checks payable to the, quote, suspect were identified to be normal and routine in nature. No fraudulent activities were detected pertaining to misappropriation of funds. Cash inflows recognized as membership dues are in line with projected revenues. And the worst thing it says, team identified internal control practices that fell short in complying with the bylaws. And so I think that on balance, the document you sent forward to me lends itself to supporting the candidate, not opposing the candidate.
Okay, do you have both pages there?
I have like 8 pages here and then a separate document that I didn't have printed out because it didn't have the findings. The findings were the most important thing to me.
Okay.
Okay, Ms. Quinn Davidson, then Ms. LaFrance.
I just wanted to ask you, so you will provide references to the clerk so that everyone will have access to those?
Yes.
Okay, and then a question for administration. Was this something that you had heard about when you went through the hiring process for this position? If yes, did you decide that it was?
No, it was not something that we had heard about before, and after the first email came in, we looked into it, and after seeing all of the information and the availability of the documents on the Homeowners Association website, talking to other people who were involved in this process, and knowing how this occurred in South Anchorage at the time, we don't think that it has any bearing on Mr. Slifka's ability to perform this job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Prowse. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I live in this neighborhood and am a member of this homeowners association, and I'm familiar with the history concerning the stadium. And just one thing that was curious to me when I moved into the area is the practice of proxies and how members can give their vote to another member by signing proxy. Would you address, Mr. Slifka, what Ms. Gallagher is referring to in terms of some of the proxies being dismissed when it came to a vote in establishing the majority decision to move forward with legal action?
Certainly. The bylaws are clear that the proxies need to be signed by the registered homeowner. Sometimes that's one person, sometimes that's two. That's in the bylaws, and there was a meeting at which some of the proxies that were presented by Ms. Gallagher did not have two signatures, and so they were not valid proxies. I would dispute much of her characterization of how these meetings were run. They were run allowing people to have their full say, and I would just characterize much of what you hear as a difference of opinion as to whether the stadium was a project that the homeowners should oppose or not.
Thank you, Mr. France. Any other questions either for Ms. Gallagher or Mr. Slifka? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so I am going to, so Ms. Marshall, you will present to us at the next meeting, is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, and I have the printouts in the back.
Okay,
So-
great. All right, I'm going to adjourn this meeting.